Hey, this is Eva with Teens in the Driver's Seat Teen Advisory Board. Thanks for attending today's session. Here are some tips to help make this session a great experience. We are committed to saving lives and reducing crashes on our roads and request each participant commit to connecting to our event from a safe location. Please do not connect while driving or operating any form of machinery. First, notice the panel to the right with several tabs. Here is where you can chat, ask questions, retrieve handouts, and see answered polls. The chat is public and you are encouraged to say hello and answer any prompts that appear there. If you have questions, post those in the Q&A window. Any handouts can be downloaded from that tab, and finally, poll questions will appear directly on your screen. The presenter invites questions. Type those into the Q&A window anytime. The prize drawing for a $50 gift card will be held at the end of the session. Make sure you stay on for that. Finally, at the conclusion of the webinar, please complete a very quick survey for this session, which will help the presenter and us improve in the future. Enjoy the session.
Good morning and welcome to today's session. My name is Shreen Shafkani and I am one of the TDS Teen Advisory Board members with the Teens in the Driver's Seat program. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Robert Wunderlich, with his presentation on speeding during COVID. Mr. Wunderlich is a senior research engineer and the director of the Center for Transportation Safety at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. In that role, he is responsible for leading the center's efforts in traffic safety research, policy analysis, education, and outreach. Over the past few years, much of Mr. Wunderlich's work has been focused on understanding the factors associated with traffic fatalities and injuries at the state and national levels and finding ways to lower them. Please help me welcome Mr. Wunderlich.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just do a quick mic check, make sure that somebody can hear me. Hello?
You sound great, Robert.
All right, great. Thanks very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today and to be able to share some of our research experience during COVID. I always really enjoy attending the Teen Driving Summit. And I'm really sorry that we can't do this in person this year because I get a lot of energy from all you young people. You might have noticed that in my picture, I didn't have quite as much facial hair, so I haven't actually shaved during the COVID experience. So that's my way of coping with it. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today is some phenomenon and some things that we saw that were a little unexpected during the COVID period. You know, anytime something like this happens where there's a big disruption in the way that we go about our business and normal activities are curtailed, it's an opportunity for people like me that are in the research business to say, well, what was the impact in our case on safety? Because that's what we're interested here at the center. And so we started looking at the crash patterns during the COVID period, and we're concentrating, at least at the beginning, on the period in about late March and April through May, when the social distancing and the stay-at-home orders were really at their height, and people were not traveling quite as much. And so what happened during that? And then we've tracked it throughout the year, and I've got some pretty, what I think is pretty interesting stuff about what happened there. All right. So there's some math. In fact, there's enough math in here that I think you'll probably get at least some extra credit in your math classes. So, you know, have your teachers don't have your teachers contact me. There's a little math, but it's not real complicated math. And here's this equation here. So crashes or fatalities or anything related to crashes are a function. They equal some sort of risk times exposure. Now, you know, what's interesting is during this pandemic, you've heard a lot about risk and exposure. Like, is your risk of dying if you're, older, probably higher. Your chance of getting it, well, you might actually get it, your chance of getting it might be more than mine because it varies as an individual. I'm not real susceptible to getting viruses, so I've been very fortunate I didn't have it, and now I've been vaccinated. And by getting vaccinated, what happened to my risk of getting it? It went way down. Now, then there's an exposure side, which is how many people do I encounter or I interact with that have the virus. Okay. And so if I'm around a lot of people, if I'm in an environment like a hospital and I might be exposed to a lot of people, that would be different than if you stayed at home and you were only with your family, right? So the exposure, and that's very similar to what happens on the road. Our exposure is how much we travel, how much we walk, how much we drive, how much we bicycle, how much we're out on the road. And then our risk is how we behave. And you guys know a lot about risk, because one of the things that is very important in the Teens in the Driver's Seat program is knowing your risk factors. So if you do certain things, right, your risk goes up. If you speed, your risk goes up. If you drive at night, your risk goes up. If you drive impaired, your risk goes up. If you're distracted, your risk goes up, right? So that's the risk part of it. And that's different for each individual. And it's different for different groups of people. Some of it has to do with the experience you've had behind the wheel. I've had a lot of experience behind the wheel. So maybe I've seen a lot of different things that you might not have encountered. So that might affect my risk. So risk and exposure, just like for a pandemic or the flu or a COVID virus and traffic crashes, have a lot of similarities because there's some function of risk and exposure. And we did some studies when I was being introduced about looking into the factors that are associated with fatalities. And during the Great Recession, which happened in about 2007 to 2010, the economy sort of tanked. You were probably very young, but you may remember your parents talking about it. A lot of people lost their jobs. Things were not really good. The housing market really cratered. And so people and fatalities went down a lot. And when we looked into it, it wasn't because necessarily of all the people traveling less. It wasn't as much exposure as it was with risk. And one of the things that we found is that young people, because they didn't have jobs, and I'm talking about young people, maybe 18 to 24, 16 to 24 years of age, they didn't have jobs. They didn't have a reason to travel to work. And they probably didn't have a lot of money in their pocket to travel either. And their travel went down. And because they're in the high risk category, we found a really big decline in risk. And there were also some suggestions that this recession hit people of lower socioeconomic, that made less money. That really hit them, and there's some evidence that suggests that they're at a higher risk or they're involved in traffic fatalities more than higher income people. So the combination of that meant it went down. So what happened during COVID? Well, obviously, we traveled a lot less, right? At part of the time, it was you should stay at home, you should avoid contact with other people, let's not get out. You weren't going to shop. We certainly weren't going to football and baseball or the movies or to concerts. And so a lot of travel went down. And so normally, if you look at this equation, what you would say is, man, if exposure goes down and we're traveling a lot less, we're going to expect fatalities to go down too and crashes to go down. Well, what happened? So let's look at this graph. And in this graph, we have the top line is sort of green. And you can see that compared to what we were traveling in the first week of March, travel really went down in 2020. So a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, when we hit the middle of March, boy, we started traveling a lot less. And in fact, this is a graph that shows it sort of as a percentage. So we were probably traveling about 40% less miles in Texas in the middle of that social distancing. And what happened with crashes? Well, wow, that's in the orange line, and it follows almost precisely, just like we would expect based on our equation. So that if we lowered the number of miles that we're traveling, we're going to get less. And you can even see the dips. These dips are the weekends, right? Saturday, Sunday. And then you see this Saturday, Sunday dip is pretty pronounced for crashes as well. So really this kind of confirms that, boy, there's a relationship between crashes. So that's great, right? We got people traveling less, and we got a whole lot less crashes. But then we looked at I'm sorry. This is again crashes, and this is comparing the number of crashes that we had during that period. So end of February to May. This is how many crashes we had in the blue line, averaged on each day in 2017 through 2019. So that's 3 years. That's 17, 18, and 19. We would normally expect this period from March to April to look like this. And what did it look like? Looked like that. So again, confirmation. But we looked at fatalities, and yeah, they were down, but boy, they just didn't seem to go down quite as much. So what's up with that? That's not as good a news. And of course, there's a lot of volatility. So this graph goes up and down, and its magnitude is a lot less. So normally we'd have just under about 10 people dying every day on Texas roads, which is pretty sobering. And we had less. We certainly had less during that period. But when we looked at comparing it to the levels that they were in the first week of March, our total crashes went down a lot. Okay, so compared to this first week in March, total crashes went down a lot. In fact, they decreased almost 60%, and that's great. Okay, good deal. But fatal crashes only went down less than 80%. So they were down, but they were not down as much. And that's not good, which means that basically we had all crashes going down 47%, and fatal crashes only went down 20%. So this is the math part. So what we would like to see, and what if this were all driven by exposure, we would see a 47% decrease in crashes, and we'd see a 47% decrease in fatal crashes, and that would be good. We would like that a lot because less people are dying on our roadways. But what this means is that the proportion of the crashes that were fatal went up by about 1.5 times compared to the level for the previous 3 years that I showed you in the graph. So compared to that period from March to April, any given crash was about 1.5 times more likely to get into a fatality than it would have been in a normal year. And that is not good, not what we would like to see. So then we started teasing this apart because we're researchers. So this is interesting to us. And we said, wow, urban crashes were down almost 50% or 50%, but fatal crashes were only down 15%. Rural crashes were down 40%. But the proportion of fatal rural crashes was down 24%. So this is closer to matching than this is. So this means that urban crashes were where we were seeing most of the increase in the fatality risk, although it also went up in rural areas. And so when we looked at multi-vehicle crashes, and multi-vehicle we mean more than one car crashing. So these are cars crashing on another. Usually it's two, sometimes it's more than two, but there are also a problem with just running off the road by yourself. That's a single vehicle crash. Those are more prevalent in the rural areas, but they still happen in urban areas too. But it turned out that this was the area where we had the biggest discrepancy, where these crashes were down almost 60% and fatal crashes only went down 15%. And the proportion of all urban multi-vehicle crashes that were fatal went up almost double. So our risk went up, right? Our exposure went down, but our risk went up. And that's not something that we really expected to see, and it was a little disconcerting. So let's look at, when we look at all of 2020, from January to December, and we compare that with what happened in the 3 previous years, 2017 to 2019. So as things started to open up, travel increased. So we were only down in crashes down 12%, but fatal crashes went up 7%, which means if you've got a decrease in the number of crashes and an increase in the fatal crashes, our risk went up. So our risk for the year went up about 12%. But during what we would call the 3 COVID quarters, which is so January, February, and March, most of March or half of March, were sort of like any other year in 2020. We hadn't stopped traveling. So January, February were like most any other year. During the period from April through the end of the year, the risk was up 30%. And so we're still kind of in that period, even though things have started to open up and we've seen crashes come up. We're still sort of in the COVID period where we're not traveling and not doing. So I'm in the office today, but I'm in the office because I got better internet in the office, and I'm here practically by myself. So people are still not going to the offices. We are traveling more to go to the grocery store and that sort of thing. Not a lot of concerts. People aren't going to the movies yet. So still travel is down. So we're still kind of in this period where the risk has really gone up. And if you look at the trends by quarter, so this is what I'm talking about. So the first quarter of a year is January, February, March. And so here we look at 2017 to 2020, and all crashes are about the same, right? We would expect January, February, and March to act almost like January, February, March in the years prior. And then as we go through the year, wow, the second quarter went down a lot. Third quarter, it was still down. And now we've kind of reached the same level that we were before. So we're in terms of all crashes, we're crashing about as much. But when we look at fatal crashes, they were about the same in the first quarter, January, February, March. And then April, May, June, they went up some. Then they were really up in the third quarter, and they've continued to be up. So now we've reached a point where we're about the same number of crashes, but we've got more fatal crashes. So our fatal crash risk is still up. And that's where we see this graph. This is really the fatal crash proportion. And the fatal crash proportion was pretty constant over these 3 years, although it definitely went up in the last quarter. And here you see where it went up a whole lot during the time we were traveling the least. Then it went down, but it's still higher than normal. Okay. Now, why is that? Okay. Why all of a sudden we're traveling less? We're not out there as much. We're not crashing into one another as much. But when we crash into one another, the fatality risk has gone up. Well, what's the biggest single determinant? There's really two, but the biggest single determinant of the severity of a crash is the speed at which the vehicle is traveling. Or if you're a pedestrian, the speed at which the crash occurs. So speed is really the biggest factor. And the other big factor is whether or not you're wearing a restraint, whether you're wearing a seatbelt or not. You can cut your risk of a fatality by 50%. By buckling up. So that's the big risk reduction factor. And I'll show you in a minute why that's important. But let's look at speeds. Now, this happens to be Dallas County freeway speeds. But I can tell you that this graph looks the same in Houston and looks the same in Austin and looks the same in El Paso or Fort Worth or any of the big metropolitan areas, the big urban areas. What you see here is a speed profile in green of what January of 2020 looked like. And what this means, this is the period from about 6 to 9 or so. And we see a big decrease in the average speed along the freeways. And why is that? That was when we were still going to the office every day. What time do people go to the office? They start maybe about 6. Some people have to be in the office by 8, but this is when there's a lot of people on the road. And the choice that we drive is governed by what everybody else is doing. So you can't just pick any speed you want and drive it. You have to drive according to, and when things get congested, what happens? People slow down. So you got what we would call the peak period of travel, a lot more cars on the road, speeds go down. During the day, it goes back up, but it went up to about 60, maybe 55 miles an hour. And then again in the evening, it drops down. Here's the southbound. Same phenomenon, right? and you've probably experienced this if you've driven during a peak hour, you have to slow down. The red line is what was going on during April. And what is the average speed almost throughout the day? Well, it's 60, 65 miles an hour, pretty constant. And you're probably saying, well, 65, that's a freeway. I think most of the speed limits are 60 or 65 miles an hour. And you know what? You're right. So this doesn't mean that people necessarily were speeding. It means they were being able to drive faster than normal. So if you have less crashes occurring, but when the crashes between two vehicles happen at higher speeds, the severity of the crash goes up, and things that might have been no injury might turn into an injury, and the things that were injuries might turn into a fatality just because we're driving faster, not necessarily because we're driving excessively. But think about what the consequences are if you're driving even faster than the speed limit and they go up. So let me show you what that relationship is. Here's some more math. So a 10% increase in speed, all right, and a 10% would mean if you're driving 50, if you go from 50 to 55, that's a 10% increase in speed. Or if you go from 60 to 66, it's a 10% increase in speed. Doesn't sound like a lot, does it? Your chance of a fatality from one speed to the other goes up 53%. So a 10% increase in speed is a 53% risk increase in a fatality and a 33% increase in a serious injury. Pretty sobering, right? Pretty so. What happens? We had less traffic, which means we have less restrictions on our speed choice. Our speed choice is more about what we feel comfortable driving. And if you feel comfortable and you don't think there's much risk at driving 60 or 65 miles an hour, you're going to drive that speed because nobody else is, all the other people are not really influencing your speed. So we get an increase in speed and even slight increases. So you might, sorry about that. So you might say, well, that's not a really big deal here, this difference in this green and red line. That's probably a 5% decrease, 5% or so, maybe 10% increase, maybe even more, 10% increase in speed. And we just saw what that means for us, right? So let's talk about another thing that we do, and we did a lot during the COVID period. We walked more. You got out of the house, you go crazy in the house all the time. So we're encouraged to walk. So what happened with pedestrian fatalities? Well, we had no decrease hardly at all. This is a real problem. It's a real problem in Texas, where this is one of the fastest growing and the growth areas in fatalities that we're very concerned with, is that people are dying as pedestrians, and that has been going up through these 3 years. And this is March, April, May, and July. So this is 4 months. And they were practically the same between 2019 and 2020. And in 2017 to 2019, in April, we had 36 pedestrian fatalities. In 2020, 41. Even in the very highest restriction of travel and less travel on the roadway in April, we had more fatalities as pedestrians than we have. And here's the last 10 years. That's about a 70% increase in the number of fatalities as pedestrians. Really, really not good. And of course, speed is a function in pedestrian, because as pedestrians and as people, as humans, in the battle against the automobile wins, and particularly the faster the car is driving. So what were the big three sort of risk things that we saw in the data with fatalities? So here in this graph up on the upper left, so you can say fatalities involving speeding. So about 750 in the years prior, right around 750, 16, 17, 18, 19, all of a sudden it goes to 900 in 2020. So that is very compatible with what we saw in the speed data itself. So now we've got a big rise in fatalities that were involving speeding. Pedestrian fatalities, They actually went down in 17 and we're steadily rising, but now we're at a level above where we were even in 2016. So pedestrian fatalities, still a problem area, still during COVID. And then look at what happened with restraints. We're going along, maybe averaging 1,000, maybe a little less than 1,000, and then we went up to 1,080. So more fatalities where we're seeing an incidence of not wearing your seatbelt. Again, these are kind of the big things that we saw where there was a difference between the previous years and what we experienced in 2020. So, what's this mean for you? What does all this math and these things mean for the risk of getting killed in a car crash or as a pedestrian has gone up in Texas, and that's where you are. Oh, and by the way, if you're participating, and I know we've got people from other states, this is Texas data. It's very similar to what's happening nationally. I have friends across the country. This is a phenomenon that we are seeing. There's not a reduction in risk in most places, and very disconcerting. So not just for Texans here, this is for everybody. And the pedestrian problem is a national problem too. So if we look at our risk factors, speed is a risk factor, not wearing your seatbelts is a risk factor. You got nighttime, and for a pedestrian, 80% of our pedestrian fatalities happen at night. And we already know from our work in teen driving, and because of your exposure to it, that nighttime driving is a risk factor for young people. So now you've got nighttime walking, nighttime driving is a risk factor, and that we've seen that. You still got distraction and drugs and alcohol. We didn't really see big increases in the fatalities associated with that. There is some evidence that drinking and driving went up. There's some evidence that drinking and driving went down because people were staying at home and they weren't going to bars. But at any rate, it ain't good. And so the big ones where we saw in the data are right here: speed, seat belts, and nighttime. Because pedestrians, we know, are mainly getting killed at night. And we know that our risk goes up at nighttime driving. Those are the big three. And then if you add these two, you got even a worse problem. So these risk factors are very important. So what does that mean? Well, it means the things that we've been learning and what you're helping to spread as leaders in the teen driving community in your schools, what you've been telling people is, we got your back and we're concerned about you. So what do we want you to do? We want you to buckle up every trip, every person. Buckle up. We want you to keep your eyes on the road and the hands on the wheel. That's all about being concentrated on the driving task and not about chatting with your friend and not about being distracted by texting or using the phone. I hope everybody's using our new app. That's awesome. I've been really excited to follow that. A lot of hard work's gone into that. I think it's a really cool thing. I hope you're using it. But one of the things, what does that help you do? Keeps your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel. We did some research about 3 or 4 years ago. We took people and we asked them math questions and other annoying things about geography while they were driving. We asked them some personal questions about, how they were getting along with their mom, and, did your girlfriend or your boyfriend break up with you, or, what are you worried about? Are you worried about your next exam? And we got people kind of worried. And then we had them text. And what we found was, as long as you had your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel, you did a pretty good job of controlling the vehicle. Maybe some speed variation, but in terms of controlling the vehicle, you're very good. We're very good, all of us, if we keep our eyes on the road and our hands on the wheel. What happens when you're texting or trying to use your phone? You take your eyes off the road and you have to take one of your hands off the wheel. And when we found that, we found a lot of variation in steering, enough to send you out of the lane, one way or the other. So we know that we're just better drivers with our eyes on the road and hands on the wheel. Let's not be in such a hurry. If we're in this COVID period and we know the only person controlling our speed is ourselves. And now our speed is more of our choice. And we can't look at the speed limit sign like a permission slip that says that's what we're allowed to drive. We need to consider the consequences. So you have control over what we drive. We all individuals. And if you slow down and I slow down, what do we do with our risk? Our collective risk goes down. So we're all in this together. Plus, I don't know if you've ever met one of these fine gentlemen. They are quite courteous and friendly, but it's a bad day. It's a bad day when you meet them. And we know that the increase in speed above the speed limit is just bad all the way around. If we're just traveling on the average of speed limit and our fatalities have gone up, imagine what it is when we go beyond that. So don't meet this guy and slow down. And if we're going to be able to choose our speeds, let's be very cognizant. And then finally, and I can't emphasize this enough. These are some people crossing the street, and they probably think this motorist can see them because those headlights. They can see their headlights. Where I can't. Why can't the motorist see me? Well, we've done some work out here at our campus where we have a test track. We've taken video of people at night, and you're practically invisible. So how do you get visible? Well, the easiest way actually is you can. I don't know if this counts against your app. I'll have to ask Russ, but everybody's got a flashlight in their pocket, right? I got one, right? I got a flashlight. If this thing is moving up and down, you're visible. Without it, practically not. You can wear some reflective stuff. I'm not saying you got to dress up like a crossing guard here, but just be cognizant that the motorist might not be able to see you. And if you're the motorist, let's be cognizant that people are not aware that they're practically invisible. So when you see that person going, what are they thinking? Just slow down and yield to them or stop for them. So being courteous, being visible, being where you should be at night, I think are the kinds of things that we need to keep in mind as we move forward. So that's all I've got right now. I hope you've got some questions for me. I just want to thank you, particularly the people that are on this summit, for your leadership as a young person in helping your peers be safer on the roadway. The Teens in the Driver's Seat program is not about old guys with gray beards telling people what to do. Now, I did give you some advice today, and I hope you will take it seriously because I've got some facts to back me up. It's not just Robert, that's what I think. That's Robert looked at the facts, came up with those ideas. And I know that you've taken some of the risk factors, but the key in improving safety is you and what you're doing in your school and in your community with your friends and the people that you associate with. And your leadership makes a difference. Never think that it doesn't. In fact, only people using their leadership to take people to a new place that's safer is what can make a difference. So my hat's off to you, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it that you can use in your leadership. And with that, I'll be quiet for a while and see if you've got some questions.
Thank you, Robert. That was very informative, and thank you for the advice. I think we can all use that advice when we're out on the roadways.
Yeah, it's not just for kids.
No,
and young people. It's for Robert and Ruby and Stacy and Russ and everybody else. So it's
absolutely
for your teachers too.
Lead by example, right? So we're going to take some questions. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone to stay on until the end. We do have a door prize in our lucky draw, which is a $50 gift card, and you need to be present to win. So don't drop off just yet. Hang in there. We have a couple more minutes. The first question we have is, there was a lot of data in your slides. Can you share your presentation with our attendees?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So we will put those in PDF format in our handouts tab, which is on the right hand side of your screen. And another question we had was, how do you think traffic safety will be post-COVID? Obviously there was less traffic on the road, people were going faster, but how do you what do you see with traffic post-COVID?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I've been asked a lot in the past year when I've done some interviews on, for the news media and whatnot, and in seminars, and that's the big question. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that it depends on what we're going back to. A lot of people are looking at the fall when school starts up again, that we'll be back in school in person, and we'll be back in college in person. And some people are going back to the office. Some people have already gone back to the office. And it depends. I think, where we are right now is our traffic levels are almost where they were, but they're just down enough where this risk is still up, where our speeds are still up. And if we get to the point where, each day looks more like it did from 2017 to 2019, then we'll probably experience less fatalities. I don't think we're going back. I don't think anybody knows, including me, what it looks like. And I think it's not going to look exactly like it did before. And I think it's going to be a little less traffic during the peak hours. And so I think that, you need to look about timing your trip and about the speeds you are. So I don't know. It's my hope that we can get to lowering risk. And I think the other thing that's important for people like us that are interested in traffic safety is we've really got to double down on reducing risk. If we're going to have more freedom to choose, we've really got to choose better. So I don't know. I think it's going to, I'm hoping that it will, it wasn't great. That's why we work every day. It wasn't great from 17 to 19, it wasn't anything to brag about, the number of people that were dying, getting hurt on our roadways. I'm hoping that we can at least get to that level and then start driving it down. But it's going to take real action on the part of our behaviors. And I think, in terms of the infrastructure and improving that and doing safety projects as well.
Well, that leads me to my next question. What do you recommend for schools to become more active in reducing speeds in their communities?
Well, that's a great question. I think around most schools, we've got some limits on the speeds that you can travel. I think those are a good idea. For a long time, the philosophy was you only lower the speed if somebody's crossing the street. I think we're sort of learning now that less speed is a safer condition, particularly in urban areas where you get some concentrations of people. I think you can ask cities and the state are usually the two entities that control speeds on your roadways. If you live in a city, most likely it's a city, and you can look at speeds. There's kind of a new philosophy that's starting that, before we sort of set speed limits based on measuring what people that were driving were choosing. I think now there's sort of a recognition that we ought to take into consideration the consequences for pedestrians and that type of thing. I think the two things you can do is, one, spread the behaviors that from teens in the driver's seat. But if you want to get active in your community, talk to the city traffic engineer or the city transportation director about how you can improve safety around your schools and in your communities.
That's good advice. Another question we had is this information, does the public get this information? I know that I saw a couple of reports over during COVID times when we're in the peak of it, but does the public have this information, or how can we spread this out to the public more so they know?
Well, that's a good point. I have spoken to members of the news media, and that's really how the public learns about things, through the news media. So I really don't turn. In fact, I'm talking with someone, television station in Austin tomorrow. And so I always accept the opportunities. I think, posting this kind of information, making sure that the people that you reach, for example, in TDS are aware of it. We could probably do more about getting it out there. So that's sort of a challenge to me, right? So you're sort of challenging my leadership to get this word out there, I guess. So,
well, maybe it's a challenge for all of us that are on today to get the word out into our communities.
I think that's right. I think there's no one person. Robert can't do it by himself. He's not that good. And so everybody's got to be talking about this and about the choices that we make, because most of these things still boil down to our choices that we make as individuals. And the more of us as individuals that make good choices, that's the really power of it, is that the more of us that make those good choices, the risk goes down for everybody. And the more that we make good choices the norm, the more likely other people are going to do it. So the more information, I think information is good. So spreading this information and showing people how to do it. And by the way, I just wanted to go back to what can you do in your community. I spent many years as a city traffic, either engineer or transportation director and public works director. And I don't think I was ever approached by a young person wanting to improve their community. I think people that are in my profession would really welcome that. And particularly when you can come and say, I'm involved in teens in the driver's seat. So you're coming to the table with something. One of the things is, and most people just come and say, you go fix this for me. Well, your power is you can come and say, look, I'm doing my part. What are you going to do? And that's a very powerful message. So I don't want you to hesitate to do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Good advice. Well, again, Robert, we really thank you and appreciate you. This was a great session. It had a lot of information. The handouts are in the handout tab, or the presentations in the handout tab for everyone. So again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to when we can do this in person again, although I know that this combination and being able to do it on the web opens it up for participation beyond. And so that's a good thing. And so like many things, the COVID period is not all bad. It's brought us some regards together or from a wider range of places. But one of the consequences of what this less travel has been is that our fatality rate's gone up, and we need everybody working to get that down again. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share this information and to visit with you, and look forward to many, many more opportunities in the future. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. It's a great challenge. Now we will continue on with our lucky draw. Good luck. We'll have to respin. Carolina Huerta, you won $50. Congratulations.
This is Joanne Menendez with the TDS Teen Advisory Board. A quick thank you to our presenters and to you for attending this session. Congratulations to the prize winner. You will receive your gift card in the email used to register for this summit. And don't forget to take the survey. And have a great rest of your day.